Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Midcurve podcast. Midcurve is a group of traders, investors, in general, interesting and semi-weird people who spend a lot of time thinking about the market, including the NFT market, crypto market, and DeFi. We, as always, are joined by our regulars here. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves a little bit, and then we have a new special guest today. So first, let's start. Grant, do you want to tell everybody who you are in like a one-line sentence of your background?
Hey everyone, my name is Grant. My background is in traditional consulting. I fell ass backwards into the NFT space a couple of years ago, and it's just been too fun and amusing for me to leave. So here I am.
Okay, great. Eric, what about you? Give us a one-line sentence about you.
Hey guys, it's Eric. I was a former TradFi weirdo for a long time, and now I am a NFT weirdo.
Great. And Salty?
Dang, we're really condensing the intros. I got to work on this. I've been in crypto maybe longer than most people on this podcast, but scared money don't make no money, and I was scared money for a while, so I'm still here.
That's actually we should dig into that at some point, Salty. I want to hear about all of your missed gains, all the times you could have been a billionaire.
That will be a sad episode. Yeah, I'm an academic researcher, engineer in real life, degen at night.
That's awesome. Okay, so really quickly, my name is Funky Donk, also known as Gavin Purcell. I'm a media person by trade, mostly background in TV, but also digital media. Came to NFTs a couple of years ago. Am very, very deep in them now, and weirdly, am now kind of working in media and NFTs. Okay, now we get to introduce for the first time a special guest. This is our first guest on the Midcurve podcast. So
hopefully
Sadie,
not the last time.
Hopefully not the last. Sadie is a member of Midcurve, and I'm just going to let her introduce herself. So Sadie, tell us a little bit about who you are, what your kind of day job is, and then kind of how you found your way into this world of NFTs and DeFi.
Yeah, sure. Hey guys, and smart of you to start with the worst Midcurve guest and then work your way up. So we both set a nice little floor.
Not true. There are many worse Midcurve members.
Let's name them now.
Funky Donk is number one worst.
Well, yeah. Now that you're cheating on us with another podcast, that may actually be true. But I am a TradFi weirdo, to quote Eric. Spent my entire career in finance, and today I'm a large cap financial services investor. So I evaluate, buy, sell financial services companies, asset managers, insurance companies, all sorts of different institutions in the financial ecosystem. And to some degree, I think crypto kind of touches that. I started dabbling in crypto in 2017, but over the past 2 years, I've had 2 garden leaves, switching jobs, and just got kind of deep into the NFT rabbit hole right when it came out in 2020. Was that 2021, 2022?
Yep, 2021. That was kind of like max NFT time, I feel like.
Did you say right when apes came out? Did you buy an ape early on?
No, I minted something else that day, of course.
Of course. That's what happened to all of us. It's the most fun story to tell. I saw apes and I passed.
But yeah, you were there for the ape drop. Like you were there like since the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always kind of dabbled in crypto. I had a crypto Twitter account for a couple of years, and it was really that summer, really starting with Pudgies, that I kind of got more involved and never escaped.
That's awesome. And okay, here's a good question for you. As somebody from the TradFi background who sees the NFT space or even the DeFi space, like, what are some of the things you kind of take from your normal background that kind of can cross over in this world? Like, are you seeing like that NFTs are like operating like TradFi in any sort of way, or is it just a completely different space?
I think there's a lot of adjacencies, but these days, most of the adjacency is regulatory. So a lot of people talk about, the SEC or what a definition of a security is, and that's stuff I sort of traffic in all the time. I think the reality is that the space is very naive and not particularly sophisticated. Even the most institutional businesses in the space around how to operate in sort of a regulated traditional finance environment, especially in the US. And so I always find it somewhat entertaining when, my crypto life and my regular life intersect. People talking about, how to fundraise, 144A offerings, crowdfunding offerings, how we test. And most of the time, I think crypto Twitter is more off base on that stuff than they are kind of in general.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense.
Is what you do, I mean, it sounds like it's like working at a college and working at a preschool. Like what you do professionally versus then you enter the crypto world. It's like, wow, literally no one knows what they're doing here.
I would say it's maybe more than that, more egregious than that.
Even more. Okay.
Like we are the crypto world is like pre-evolved humans, some sort of caveman opportunity babies. They're like caveman babies.
So I wanna be like a little bit fair, which is that most TradFi people don't know any of this stuff either. So
Sure.
the knowledge I have is relatively specialized, and have been able to do a lot of interesting things at places that have a lot of capital and a lot of flexibility, and so I have like a unique background even among people who invest in finance. But yeah, it's like MIT versus my kid's like 2-year-old class.
Eric, you agree with that? Is that your experience in this world?
I was gonna say it's more so like, I knew TradFi is a spectrum, and so there's a lot of unsophisticated versus very sophisticated TradFi investors. But I would say it's like moving from a country club to walking into the middle of the Lord of the Flies, where you're fighting over the conch, and where Piggy's already dead.
Can I
Okay.
say, as somebody far outside that, my really only financial fi experience is in the crypto world, I'm always surprised to hear that because I get why there's idiots and subpar people and really just left curve stuff left and right in cryptos because it's such an inefficient market. There's so much fat to shave off. Like there's no matter how bad you are at what you do, you can come squeeze some juice out of this orange. But I'm always surprised to hear how totally incompetent people can be in the TradFi world too, because it seems so much more competitive, so much more aggressive. The margins are so much smaller. That's not the case. People are fools there as well, huh?
It's less so that people are fools, but I think we have, there is an overabundance of like articulate incompetence, such as myself, which is say we're like extremely
Good
well
bullshitters.
which is like extremely well educated people who can talk at length about certain things, but we don't like, you're not necessarily above, within the above average in terms of actually making money, but it also really doesn't matter because so much of the industry is more asset gathering focused. So having having that skill set where you can articulate, actually can guarantee you a pretty steady living in the space, right? But it's very very different. Like when you go from like a traditional asset manager like a T Rowe to a crossover fund like a Kite Global, to a multi-manager like a Citadel, like or even and then you have like the whole private equity sphere, which is kind of its own game, and so it's just hard to kind of, the industry is so big, it's hard to like square it into a single box, but you're gonna meet it's just I would say it's like very similar to actually the NFT ecosystem where you have guys who are like really, and then you have dudes who are obvious giga brains. And I think this is like, NFTs as a whole are just are kind of a microcosm of that, just with even rougher edges and none of the regulation and guardrails.
Right.
Once everyone graduates from 6529's Metaverse University, the space is really going to
We'll grow
level
up.
up.
Oh yeah.
We'll have diplomas then. It'll be nice.
Yeah, I was at the I was at the Bright Moments Mint earlier this week, to like kind of mint my diptych, And I saw somebody in like a Zen Academy sweatshirt, and somehow it really, really just triggered me in that moment. And I had to like leave very, very quickly.
All right, well, let's
Hey-
jump in. Oh, sorry, Saul, do you have
Well,
anything you want to say?
Yeah, I wanted to. I mean, we don't have to go down this rabbit hole, but Sadie mentioned it, and I think it's in the news. And we have our typical. What did Eric say? They sound competent but incompetent. What was the word you used? Articulate but incompetent. But now we have somebody
Yeah.
who's actually articulate and competent with us.
You're right. Maybe we should ask them some questions. So go ahead, ask it. Yeah.
Sadie mentioned securities and she mentioned regulation, and there's been the rumblings of more Wells notices, and I think Lido specifically getting one and stuff like that. So we don't have to do this, but I would be happy to talk about regulation. If Sadie has any predictions, what she sees.
Let's do it. Let's jump in. I don't know, Sadie, what's your take on that? I'm curious because obviously I will say, as somebody who is watching from the outside, as somebody who's mostly on the NFT, like, non TradFi background, I never know what of these things to trust anymore. I never know how much of this stuff is rumors, how much of its stuff is baiting, how much of its stuff is real. So what is your take on this, on the world we're entering now, the securities and regulation stuff?
It's a great question, and I don't know that anyone really can predict the future, but I'll give you a couple of thoughts. I think in some ways it goes back to kind of the evolution of a newish industry and where we are in that. And so, the prior question was, why do dumb people exist in TradFi? I think partially that's because there's just a lot of money there, and so places have gotten big, and then people can subsist on looking like they do things within those places. At the beginning of TradFi, and I have been lucky enough in my career to work with a couple of folks who kind of invented the private equity business. It was the best people who came from the prior thing. So, the smartest guys at DLJ or, any other bank that existed at that time then went off and started their own investing business. And they created new asset classes, right? So it's not unprecedented and it's not unusual. I think the difference is that they were sophisticated enough to engage with the regulators in a relatively kind of toe-to-toe type manner. And so what you see here is you see this new asset class, but there's not really anyone who's kind of on the level of the most sophisticated people on the traditional side to really step up and go toe-to-toe with the regulator and make the right argument and understand where they need to have consistency of logic, so they're not going to be able to get everything. And so I think that's kind of my concern with where we are today is without that sort of institutional understanding, I worry the regulator just treats crypto like a bunch of kids. And that's not the right way to think about it, both from the perspective of, giving crypto license to operate in the US, but also because, I think there probably are pockets of folks who are, at least understanding enough of, the puts and takes to be able to have a logical conversation. But I don't know that the regulator knows where they are or is going to have any sense of wanting to engage.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So basically, because we're in such a kind of nascent state around this stuff, you're saying that like there aren't the power players that exist in the way that a traditional power player kind of system might work, so that we're at a slight disadvantage because we don't have the person that can kind of go in. If you have the person that can kind of go in on this to kind of fight for it, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and look, that's decentralization, right?
Right.
And so, it's a feature and also I think maybe a slight bug. I do think over time, as long as there are still gigabrains and builders in crypto, it will start to attract smarter people, people who have built stuff in other industries, like genuinely built stuff, not like, VC funded.
Right. Right.
Well, so one question is, so you're saying that like Brian Armstrong, the Winklevoss twins, and what's his face who runs Kraken, they're not our guys. They're not going to be good enough to do this at the level of sophistication necessary, potentially, possibly.
this is definitely not an insult at any one individual. I think it's a
Oh no, please insult.
Yeah,
Please
no,
insult.
I didn't. No, Sadie's got a real job. I'm not trying to make her say
Just
that.
kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding.
it's definitely not intended to be an insult on any to any of them, but I'll insult people when the time comes.
I heard you on that Ryan Carson post Ryan Carson space. I know you can go after people.
Yeah, SEC. Yeah. Anyway, never mind. Yeah. So I think what that question actually is asking is like, are these people our guys? But I think it's more of a indicative of a broader problem, which is you need crypto natives who are also TradFi natives, and there's like 3 of us in the space.
That's really interesting.
You can't like those folks they're crypto natives, but they're not the guys that you would pick in a vacuum to run a public company.
Do you think that's a matter? One of the things I often think about as somebody, this is going to sound insane, but my version of this is I was one of the first like kind of like hardcore gamer people to get into like a semi-power position in the media space, right? Like, so one of the things that we did when I was working at Fallon was we did like a video game week, and suddenly like it was like this big deal that video games were being kind of covered as a normal kind of media piece. Do you think it's a matter of age? Like, do you think it's a matter of like just younger people who will grow up with crypto as a thing that they'll come into that kind of world? Or do you feel like it's more of a matter of like TradFi people have been scared off by crypto and that they will come on board? Like, I guess what I'm saying, is it generational or is it more the environment?
I think it's more cultural than generational, but over time, I think, the same thing will happen.
That makes sense.
Sadie, how much of this do you think comes from the fact that the initial incubation of crypto it just came from this like very fringe movement of cypher funds, right? Because I think the private equity example is great because like when you look at like guys like Schwartzman and like Leon Black and sort of the early group of guys who kind of build the private equity business, a lot of them came out of those traditional banking finance rails. They went to school with a lot of ended up going to the same schools of the people that were in those regulatory positions. So it seems like by when it was time for them to kind of go out and establish the private equity business, those networks and relationships were already kind of in place. So they were just much better equipped to have conversations and help establish those frameworks. Whereas like I look at kind of the original sort of group of people that we can attribute to for give a lot of credit to for the inception of the entire crypto movement. It's guys like Hal Finney or like Vitalik, and they're just I just hard to conceive them being in the same room as like I'll put Gensler aside, but even I think like regulators that would have gotten it, like Preet, Bahara, or or others in that position.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's relationships and it's sort of a common understanding. It's also just credibility. So there's some signal and noise there, but I think that's right. I think it's not that they deserve kind of to be taken less seriously, but I do think there are some sort of like more traditional qualifications that people use as shortcuts. It doesn't matter whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. The reality is that it exists, and so crypto is going to have to figure out how to bring on people that just have the institutional or educational or experience kind of in their background to be able to be taken seriously.
So you don't have a specific prediction of I'm sure this is going to happen, but like it's clear you probably have enough hope or optimism to remain in the space, right? And it's not like you're only buying Bitcoin because we can be sure Bitcoin's not a security.
Not only do I not have a specific prediction, I genuinely think that the future is still open at this point. So it's around how constructively the community is able to engage with the regulator, what they're willing to not get, and sort of how maturely they're willing to do
Yeah, I
it.
mean, I think the future is open. I mean, that's still a much better prediction than not that it is a prediction per se, but it's like better than I mean, a lot of people will say with like oh Gensler or but someone's gonna kill crypto. It's dead. Like, it's all securities. It's all gonna be gone. Like, there's a lot of doom and gloom every time this happens. And if you've been here for, of course, even a couple years, this happens like probably 6 to 12 times a year. Is like,
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think is always a funny thing, right? It always feels like you never really know what's real. It goes back to my thing, like what's real and what's just bullshit, right? What are people trying to scare people with, or what are people afraid of? Like the thing about the crypto space that I think is so fascinating, and again, coming from outside any sort of financial background, is so much of it is black or white in terms of what the sentiment is. Like there is not very many people who live in a normal middle ground. It's either all going to go to hell or it's all going to go to the sky. And like it's a very fascinating thing to watch people vacillate back and forth. And maybe it's just because people have been jerked back and forth on price for so long and it's such a volatile asset in general, but like it's really hard to get like true feeling of like what's actually going to happen sometimes. Like the security stuff is such a good example because I think people are out there like chicken littling it, and it's a really crazy thing. And part of me is like, you know what, this is politics, right? Politics is always going to get in the way of this stuff. It feels like, I've said this before, but the Gensler stuff in a lot of ways to me feels like he's just being reactive to fucking up the SBF stuff. So I don't know. I mean, it's a fascinating thing to watch. And Sadie, I don't know. Like, what do you have a thought, like short to midterm, like what's going to happen with all this, or do you have an idea? I don't have to make a prediction, but I'm just kind of more curious.
Yeah, I guess I have three reactions. The first is that I think in general, when this stuff comes out, not so much FTX and like real fraud, but SEC actions or news thereof. I think crypto Twitter is about 50% too bearish. Usually they're not as bad as it sounds, frankly. So that's one. Two, typically those announcements are after the thing has happened. So in some ways they're actually bullish. So the reaction just isn't as logical. They're removing overhang that has existed. What the settlement is reached or a fine is paid. That is actually a bullish thing because it means that they're continue to operate and continue to be in business. And then the third thing I would say is there's this fundamental kind of agreement within the community that securities regulation being applied to crypto would be a bad thing. In my view, that would be the most positive catalyst that we've ever had.
Interesting. Okay, explain that. Why?
Crypto and NFTs sort of as a kind of smaller subset within it is just really small. I mean, institutional capital is giant. However you cut it, right? It dwarfs crypto and NFTs in size. And so by creating some regulatory clarity and allowing really large investors to be able to allocate to crypto and feel really good about it and know what they're getting into and like there isn't some sort of esoteric risk involved, I think would be massively bullish.
Interesting. Okay. Anybody have any thoughts before we move on from general talk?
Yeah, Sadie, I'd love to get your sense of read of like from where you said, what is sort of the institutional capital's appetite for crypto right now? How are they kind of looking at the space in light of the regulatory, some of the regulatory noise that we've seen recently?
So I can't speak for everyone, obviously. My experience is more on the private market side, though I do have some recent experience long short. I would say right now institutions are trying to have their cake and eat it too. So they want to be seen as people who understand crypto, but it tends to be more of a marketing exercise than an actual investing exercise right now. Internally, places remain tremendously dismissive of the technology, of the community. They're going to miss it again.
So they're basically trading crypto like ESG at this point.
100%.
All right. Fair enough.
Interesting. Okay, let's thank you, Sadie. That was actually super fascinating, and I think it's a good perspective to have. Let's jump in a little bit to this market. I think why don't we can kind of skip the kind of vibe check right now, and I think go straight into the conversation. Actually, why not? It might be an interesting way to just to get a sense of where we're going. You don't have to give me a word, Grant, but like I kind of want to hear from you where you kind of feel like we're at since we kind of feel like we've hit an inflection point a little bit, and And the game today is we are going to try to say blur as little as possible. So every time you say blur, we're going to have you mint a project that I suggest at some point. So that's the game. So you get ready to lose a lot of money.
I would love to not talk about it. Unfortunately, this market is drier than, I don't know, the Sahara Desert. It sounds kind of cliche, but yeah, I don't.
I got nervous about what that analogy might be for a second. Yeah. Sweating.
We keep it PG today. Yeah, this is just continuing reverbs from the previous cycle, right? Like there's no, to Sadie's earlier point about as long as there's a sufficient pool of talent here, the capital and the speculation will follow. Well, we just haven't seen that manifest into real product yet, right?
Yeah.
And we keep coming back to it week after week. I can tell you about all the projects I'm whitelisted for and the things that I think are plus AV and flippable, but it's just not paradigm breaking in any way.
Let's talk about, I think it might be worth digging into Momoguru a little bit. Momoguru, whatever it is. I think it's like, someone will figure it out, but it's Momoguru, I think. So this was a project that launched this week and was backed by, Disney execs, also had like a pretty significant story behind it. I think was VC, they had a VC raise, VC backed. And it came out, did really well. This is, by the way, this is a pattern I'm kind of seeing, is that came out, did really well. Dingling bought, swept, and then it feels like there's a moment in a dingling sweep when it goes up, and then it just slowly trickles down. So I guess the question I have when we go back to this idea, so Grant, just to go back to you, was Momoguru something you were excited about? Do you think it has any sort of legs? And is this an example of an interesting project in somebody more a builder that's coming into the space, or is this just not enough of that yet?
I just don't think it's fair to cast judgment on them yet, right? Because they're 2 days out of mint. With the information that I have, I would say, yeah, it's just kind of a replay of kind of, the hype of previous cycles where, are we really attached to Pixar or Disney? Sort of. Not really, but that's going to be our tagline, and that's what, is going to justify 0.22 times 10,000 or whatever it ended up being, capital that we're going to take on mint, and this is why we have the hype that we have generated so far. Right. The price action over the last 2 days is that's, as far as I can tell, kind of the usual, right? It mints out. There's a couple FOMO curves, and then we'll see what happens in the artwork reveal and kind of the plans that they have in the future. I think there's some mention about potentially a game in Roblox that's in the works. I don't really have a view on that. Announcing a game is kind of, it's in the scammer's playbook, but it can also, there's that 1 in 1 millionth chance that it's the next big thing, right? So it's impossible to cast judgment on it right now. So yeah, we can talk about Momoguru, our utopian avatars, or whatever the heck else has kind of been dropped recently, as just this overall, first of all, lack of appetite in PFPs relative to everything else out there in the market, and just generally, a lack of innovation.
Yeah, it's interesting that utopian avatar thing was so. I mean, that literally was run back the 2021 playbook in the weirdest, kind of grossest way to me. It was, celebrity endorsements. It was pretty bad PFP art. It was metaverse. It was all the same shit. It felt like just something they had been waiting on to mint for a while. And FaZe Banks even was involved with it somehow, which is incredible. The Momoguru one is an interesting one, and I want to dig into this a little bit just because you mentioned the price action of FOMO a couple times and then slowly dipping down and what it is. It's been a long time since we've had a project, I would say almost as far back as Digi's, where something feels to have kind of passed the FOMO curve. Now I'm probably forgetting something interesting, but that's a long time ago, right? Like, I don't know, Eric, or even Sadie, or let's start with Eric and we'll go to Sadie. Like, what is your kind of feeling on this kind of like doldrums of new projects?
It's less so a doldrum of new projects, but more so a lack of projects of substance. We have projects launching every other day, but most of those projects I think they're just built to incentivize speculation. And in a space that's not really growing in terms of the number of participants, that speculation is always short-lived. And so, projects that have been around for a while that are actually progressively building are not really seeing benefits in terms of price. And it's kind of the same bank, like bunch of players looking for the next shiny new thing to generate excitement and interest, before they move on to something else. So like I think for me it's just like there hasn't been any project where you look at this and say, well, like this as a completed product. The product is actually good and interesting. There is a clear vision and point of view here, and it is going to really make people excited. And I think part of the issue with that is it's kind of like a chicken and egg problem. There's a lack of depth in terms of talent depth in terms of like people who can build like products that people want to use. And that's a very different skill set. I'll stick with NFTs because I think that's to do that, to do something that's consumer facing and really fucking compelling, is something that you need to like that requires either a lot of experience or just like an it factor. And we don't have those people in those space here because the audience is too small. And they can do other things that are in Web3 that are more lucrative.
Yeah.
And so, but the problem, it's a chicken and egg problem because on the other end, like without that, like I think it's really hard to bring more people into this space.
Well, here's the other thing I'll add to that, by the way, too, is that like the idea of what you're building and what it's going to be can also like something could be super innovative and a pretty good product and not be a financially good thing. Like an example of something. Yeah. So something I looked at this week, which I think everybody should look at, even if you don't participate in it, is this thing called McPepe's, which was a really interesting project that I found out is backed by somebody that's been in crypto for a while. I had a little brief chat with him, but if you haven't done it, definitely go take a look at it. Basically, it is a really smart built front end that allows you to use AI to mint an infinite amount of Pepes. There's literally no supply cap. It, to me, is one of the better, like, kind of new NFT products I've seen in a while, because basically it allows you to use a generative AI engine on the web page to create a Pepe from a custom model. You can then choose to mint it or not. But like there's a whole other story with the token. I don't really know what their business model is, but the product was pretty interesting, right? Like the actual product was pretty interesting. It is not at all designed to be a number go up project, right? Because if you have an infinite number of NFTs available, it's never gonna be an infinite number go up thing. What they're building is semi-fascinating though, because it's a way to integrate Gen AI with NFTs. So to me, it's going to be really fascinating to see like what is an NFT, what NFTs like are interesting versus like price goes up on, because I think this is where we might start maturing to the level where we're going to divorce from NFTs as speculative only for the sake of being speculative and seeing what can happen next to them. Sadie, I don't know. I know you were like, I remember you were pretty into digis when they first came out, and I think you had a digi PFP for a while, and obviously kind of watched that whole kind of explosion happen. Like, what about what is your take on like why we haven't seen something of that size or larger company kind of come out of NFTs yet, for a little while?
Yeah, and I think you can kind of contextualize a little bit too. I mean, the reality of like, I don't remember how many days there, 2,000. To pump a 2,000 piece project to 12 ETH, you don't need a lot of capital to come into the space, or really any. You really just need to capture the attention of certain, pieces of people who are already in crypto, and that's what Digi did. So to me, like that's what's interesting is, can you get crypto Twitter? And if you can, it'll pump. as the market gets bigger, you're going to need to aggregate more capital than that. But right now, it's small enough that a relatively small amount of capital will create a huge penguin. Look, you either need new Ponzi's or new money. I think crypto Twitter understands that the coin is the product in crypto. And so when you have somebody out there tweeting who becomes the main character of Twitter, or crypto Twitter anyway, they're going to understand that that is the product. Any actual product being built by the Digi team is, coming later. It's speculative. So what are you buying? You're buying the attention. And so I think that's why that pumped, and that's why, I was involved. It was less about being bullish on crypto gaming. I think that's an entirely other conversation. But this is just about kind of understanding what crypto Twitter values and understanding that that's the new money. That's really the exit liquidity.
I think that's really interesting. And also I would dig in on your just following you in Midcurve. Like you're pretty pragmatic in terms of how quickly you ship stuff off once it kind of like goes up in some ways. Like, are there any projects in the space that like you believe are long-term holds, or are you somebody who's just like, I'm in for this as it kind of goes up and down, and I'm not going to be like looking to have anything in my wallet for more than a month?
I'm pausing to think about whether that is a pragmatic perspective or whether it's just my personality, but no. Yeah, it's I don't get attached to your JPEGs, people.
That's fair. That's fair. Salty, what about you in your world? Like, are you seeing a situation where is there anything coming that's interesting, or what is your take on like why these projects, like, nothing is really sticking around for a while at this point?
I don't know connected those two questions are because there's so much fruit to be harvested when it comes to financial experimentation on blockchains and what's possible. Reading all of TradFi, yes, which people complain about oddly enough, which is like, of course we're going to rebuild all of TradFi and we're going to try lots of new things, probably the majority of which fail. So there's a lot of like iterative things happening right now that are interesting. As far as what gains traction, I think for tokens and coins, it's the same thing everyone said here about NFTs. It's the purchasing and accumulation of attention as influencers, as crypto Twitter, whales, all this type of stuff, except for a very small handful of Lindy, mostly immutable projects that serve as the backbone of DeFi. Outside of that, I think the narratives for other tokens are pretty darn similar.
Okay. So this is an interesting thing, and Sadie, this kind of brings us back to what we were talking about early on, which is if that's the case, if the case is that like the narratives are driving both the crypto Twitter narratives are driving both tokens, NFTs, and coins, like how do we ever convince the TradFi money to come in? This is what I think maybe is the heart of like how this discussion happens. Because if we all kind of agree that like the TradFi money is the way that we're going to move forward, and maybe it does go back to Sadie what you're saying, that it's purely regulation, but it seems like from the outside, if I'm an old person looking at this with a big checkbook and have some money to put in, if I were to even dip into crypto Twitter for all of like 15 minutes, I would be like, no, thank you. This seems crazy. I see how people are manipulating the market. I see how people are driving it. I mean, are we just going to be stuck in this world for a while? Is that what we kind of see? Like, is this just the world that like crypto is going to live in for the foreseeable future?
I don't think necessarily. I think it's about who we choose to worship. So, the past cycle was Three Arrows and FTX and, Danny and Andre and
all people who are probably bad,
man.
Bad choices. I
haven't thought about Danny in a while.
And if you worship value extractors, like the cycle's going to end as it. I think there are better folks, and if this cycle, those equivalents are 65-29 in the Canto crew, like maybe that's a little better, and maybe it's not the value extractor.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something to be said for who we look to guide us, right? Grant, do you have any thoughts on that? Like in terms of like whether directly into the NFT space or about this idea at large, about like who are our heroes?
And sorry, Grant, before you go, I would just add to that, like, money will enter the space when people in the space make a shit ton of money. That's what generates new capital. And so the trick is just not to like have everyone lose it all.
Pretty hard sometimes though, right?
Yeah, very difficult.
Sorry, Grant.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, the idea of losing it all and just chopping yourself up was like really wasn't unique to like this sector, right? In the economy writ large over the last like 16 months ish. So while like we're all incredibly disappointed and sound really bleak about the space, I'm actually like okay, right? Like, and I'm of the opinion we don't really need any idols, like false or otherwise, to worship. Like the whole point of this space, the principles in which it was built at least is like self-sovereignty, and self-sovereignty comes first from using your own damn brain to think and to make your own decisions, right? Obviously we've strayed a little bit from that, as you can see, but nonetheless I return to that as a first principle for sure, every day.
Don't you think though that in terms of the psychology of markets that eventually that is going to, I mean, yes, I agree. Self-sovereignty is an amazing idea. And I think all of us would definitely try to get to there ourselves. But don't you think also part of markets is following volume, sentiment, all that stuff? And then it becomes a little bit in this world where the market is smaller, who drives the narrative that can drive the volume? That's the thing that I keep coming back to that's kind of tricky and about like how this world is driven by sentiment specifically is because it's such a small market still.
You're spot on. Like we're kind of, even internally, like the last 5,000 of us left in the space agree, like there's no sort of cultural talisman to hang on to. Like,
yeah,
like to be clear, we were never cool. NFTs were never cool in the mainstream. It was incredibly cringe. But people saw the dollar signs and they came running in, and they kind of they did a let's grin and bear it. Same thing with kind of the ESG parallel that Eric and Sadie kind of definitely referred to earlier on. It's just kind of a grin and bear it situation, right? And now curtains have been pulled up, and we kind of see what's left, and it's not pretty, right? And it's just like, for me, it's waiting for the real builders of the last cycle to either give up or to come out with something new, or yeah, we kind of just tread water, really.
For what it's worth, that makes me like tremendously bullish. If you don't see the type of drawdown we've seen in this cycle, I don't think you get another blow off the top. And so, mature markets don't result in the kind of returns that folks have seen in crypto over the last 2-3 cycles. And I think this is a tough period of time in terms of the number of us left and the number of builders in the space. I think that is inherently in itself like just tremendously bullish for those of us that are left.
that's really, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, we should probably wrap up. We're getting long in the tooth here. Sadie, before we go, we have everybody kind of chat about what we're looking forward to this week. Is there anything that you're kind of keeping your eye on, whether it's in the DeFi space or in the NFT space, that's interesting to you coming up in the next week or two?
So I'm finding these Vince Van Doe notable Pepe is sort of interesting. If you go back to the new Ponzi's or new Capital, Rare Pepes is a slightly different community. And so to the extent that, it's able to cross over and get some traction and interest, that could be something that is interesting. 2 of the notable Pepes so far have been delisted by OpenSea, so we'll see. But
Wow. Oh, that's it. I didn't know that. That's interesting. Are they because of DMCAs?
Yep.
Wow. God, that's so fascinating to me. I always forget about that. It's Matt Fury, right? He's the one who's issuing them?
No, it's not. It's actually, they're all, different art. And so there's various.
Oh, right. It's actually like, yes. God, that's crazy.
Vince is such a big collector of Matt. I really doubt he would do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. But also, like, also in that instance, actually, I'd be really curious. I got to dig in on that myself and figure out which ones got delisted, because if they're Pepe, they should be covered under like artistic license. But it's so fascinating to dig in.
I'm not sure we want to get into the controversy here, but it was not delisted because of Pepe. It was the.
I see. I got it. We can catch up on it, but it's good to know what it's good. Yeah, it's good to know that as well. All right, great. That's interesting. I think that that Vincent Van Gogh thing was fascinating, because I think when it first came out, everybody was like cash grab, right? Like I think he cleared a remarkable amount of money on it. But the good news is, like, Vincent Van Gogh is not somebody who is necessarily looking to cash grab now. But the thing is, he's turned it into something else, which, it's I admire the fact that it's like he's made something that has some sort of pathway out of the OE meta. Like, there's definitely other people from the OE meta who feel like they took a nice chunk of money and kind of haven't done as much. So I think that's cool. Okay, Grant, what about you? What are you looking forward to this week? Is there anything coming up that you got your eye on?
As someone with Pepe bags, I have to agree with Sadie. I think structurally it's obviously like a derivative of, Jack, Butcher, and 6529, but I'm excited to sort of see what he continues with in terms of, the artists. I mean, his Rolodex has got to be one of the deepest in the industry. And my reservation with the prior to the mint was kind of just potential tarnish to his reputation from the Starry Night Capital incidents, I guess, which is actually, interestingly enough, like looking to finish the final leg of this journey, shall we say, pretty soon. The pieces collected in that fund are being liquidated, or in the process of being liquidated. So yeah, I'm interested to see how that continues. And I think, once 1155's got a bit more, shall we say, bid support, sometime in the near future, let's see how the market forces take the price action.
Was that alpha?
No, definitely nothing I say is alpha, really.
Sadie, you don't know this yet, but the Midcurve podcast only includes negative alpha. We only talk about things that are going to go down.
Bonky's hidden folder.
Yeah, exactly. My hidden folder only goes up in number of items. Let's keep it that way.
Oh, except for what happened to the owls? I totally missed
well,
that. Right?
Hold
Isn't
on.
Bonky-
Wait for my
Okay,
time,
okay.
Salty. Wait for my time. I will let you know about the owls. Eric, what about you? What are you looking forward to this week?
I'm just kind of looking forward to the Claire Silver announcement on Monday. I feel like, there's been a lot of excitement there. I feel it's, by the way, through all of this, right? Like, the one thing that has held up, I think, relatively well within the space and gotten progressively more traction is different vectors of art and different creators who have been creating in this space for a long time. And so, in that sense, the medium is very much serving its purpose, which you like to see. But yeah, she's been teasing this big announcement on Mondays. And my bags are pretty packed at this point. So let's see it.
I adore Claire. I don't know her personally, but I think she is going to hopefully. I think we're getting her on this other show I work on, Overpriced JPEG, soon. But I think one of the coolest things about Claire is not only is she an amazing artist, but as somebody who's done, some AI art myself, she is so good at representing AI art and also helping people onboard into it. Like, one of the things about AI art that's been really tricky, I think, for people, especially but in NFTs or in the world at large, is this idea of, like, if you do AI art, are you really an artist? Are you're just putting things into a machine? And I think Claire is an amazing educator about, like, what can be done with AI art. So I couldn't be more thrilled for her success. And I think that's right. I think what's cool about her too, and just from a market standpoint, is every art movement has to have, like, kind of, we go back to we just talked about with, like, the influencer world, or people that are kind of their shining star, and Claire is shaping up to really be that right now for AI art. So I think that's super smart. Definitely worth keeping an eye on. Okay, Salty, what about you? What do you have? What are you looking forward to this week?
I don't think I want to name any like projects specifically. I thought it was a fun week in our little DeFi and tokens channel in Midcurve, because A lot of people were learning how to LP and feeling the pain of impermanent loss. And we had some discussions about being an incumer. Like there's plenty of ways if you have a stack that you want to keep in volatiles to get yield off that isn't just made up token emissions. And maybe more people, it's like the consensus fallacy type thing. You just assume people know what you know. Um, but we have different expertises. But I look forward to us all learning together more about that. So as far as people outside Midcurve who listen to the podcast, I don't know, do yourself a favor and learn about options pricing and stuff a little bit, and learn about impermanent loss, liquidity, market makers, dexes, order books. So these are just nice things to know about in you have time to read now in the bear market, and you'll understand more about when they announce these new projects. Although still a lot of it's an attention economy. And I think we talked a little about GameFi. The cutting edge seems to be not the cutting edge. I mean, just people are now doing it because it's like, not do it. GameFi, DeFi, NFT, Fi. It's like you just so you maybe you'll fall farther and farther behind unless you just like collecting art. You don't know what any of this stuff is. So get educated this week.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I think the other thing I've been thinking about this a lot lately is somehow and somewhere I had a business idea that somebody's welcome to steal or Midcurve can steal it, but like somebody needs to do like a series, almost like a masterclass series that could be you could charge for, but which is like you don't have to charge a lot, but you'd have like a way to catch up on all this stuff, because like in an ideal world, like if you come into this space, there's just so much to have to be able to learn right away. And like what you're talking about with the permanent loss, like that's something I learned pretty straightforward on my own. And then I Googled it and I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is how this works. There's just a lot of stuff for people to kind of take on. So yeah, that all makes sense. Okay, for me, there's two quick things. I do want to talk about, as Salty mentioned, there was an Owls project, ASCII Owls, very dumb, small project. But as I talked about last time, Stealth Mint came out. One guy made it. It got botted to shit, but it's done pretty well. I think there's going to be places for that. On the flip side of that, always be careful. There was another thing that tried to purport itself as a Stealth Mint this morning. I don't want to name it, but it was a drainer. So when you live in this world where you're looking at Stealth Mints, you always have to watch out. My advice for Stealth Mints is always to make sure to watch volume. And generally at this point, don't mint ahead of time. Wait till it gets to a certain level of volume and that the botters have moved away from it. But the more interesting thing I kind of am looking forward to is there was a small announcement at ETH Denver that I kind of think went under the radar a little bit, which is a new type of wallet that came out. Are you guys sure about this? ERC-4337?
Yes, the smart wallets, which is
Yeah.
really cool because I think it recognizes the fact that most people cannot be trusted to remember or write down or keep us 12 word seed phrase secure.
Yeah.
And so this subtracts from it. I think there is actually a like special it's very optimized for gaming on chain as well. And just there's all sorts of like I think abstractions that basically makes it like very, very much like what you would expect from a modern day smart wallet.
Yeah.
Which honestly would be like an amazing innovation, and it's something that I think this is the kind of the brass taxes like infrastructure level stuff that you need in this space to onboard more people.
That's exactly what I think is interesting to me about it. And I think that things like this are not going to be as hyped as, the Momoguru mint or the Blur OpenSea war, but like this felt to me like something significant, and it felt to me like something that everybody should be paying attention to, because we talked about GameFi briefly just then, but like games are going to onboard a lot of people into this space if they can figure it out right in a cool way. And we just saw this week Prime, the Parallel token, come out for the it was like whatever. I think Parallel launched in like November of 2021 or maybe even before that, and like it's finally coming to fruition. But like if there is a world where a wallet can exist that's much simpler for people to use, this has two-factor authentication built in. It also has the ability of like multi-sigs to allow you to recover your seed phrase rather than having to like remember it. So I just think like this is the stuff to pay attention to. Like these are the things that are being built now that could really significantly impact this world in the next stage. And I think it's also the kind of thing that makes me like positive that there is going to be a next stage, because I think one of the things I often sometimes think about when you're in the deep depths of these bear markets, and I love always getting Grant's take on where we are, because every step along the way it's not been the most exciting since we've done this podcast, but the idea that something like this can come out and you can just see it and you can read about it, and then you're like, oh, I can see how that could positively impact and onboard a lot of people. That feels like an important thing to me. So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on it. Anybody have
Can
a
I
thought
just
on
mention that we talked about owls and no one talked about moonbirds, which to me is like a different
That's
level
also
of
a
a deep cut.
That's also true. I mean, moonbirds, there's too much. We could say something, we could say nothing. I feel like there's plenty of it's like moonbirds is basically our blur as well too. We don't need to talk about
Let's just take 45 minutes to say nothing.
A moment of silence. Take a moment of silence.
That's Silicon Valley show writer's opinion of Kevin Rose. Succinctly wraps up my opinion, I would say.
I also would love to see a Silicon Valley type of show built around NFTs. I know it's like such a niche audience, but it would be so much fun.
It would be great.
Imagine. Okay, well, Sadie, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate you being here. This was a really cool experience, and we really appreciate all the stuff you brought to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. This was fun, and hopefully your next Midcurve guest is way less boring.
Oh, please, Sadie, I think you were. Don't discount yourself. Like we need this stuff. This is super smart. I mean, who are we going to have? So I don't know who else would be less interesting or more interesting than you are. So anyway, thanks for coming on.
And shit on Ryan Carson.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, at some point we'll get into the where does Ryan Carson go from here? Actually, maybe that will never happen, that conversation. But
do we have to.
We don't.
I mean, he has a boat, right? So probably there.
That's pretty good. He goes on the water.
Let's just get Ryan Carson on the show. Fonky, just reach out.
We'll see what happens. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming in. We will see you next week. Have a good week in the wild, wild world of crypto and NFTs. Bye, everybody.